Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to a Blood Splattered vlog. Much like with the last video, I'm riding solo this week as I'm still out of town visiting my family. But don't you worry, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled conversational vlogs with Count Chocula when I get back in town. Anyway, now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about Lights Out. This is a movie I was really looking forward to because I really liked the 2013 short that the movie was based on. The short, which some of you might have seen, was also called Lights Out and was basically about this woman who was going to bed who's being stalked by this creature that can only be seen in the dark. I.e. only seen in silhouette because, well, you can't actually see in darkness in film, so you kinda have to fudge it. And it has one hell of a creepy fucking punchline, like seriously, I fucking nearly jumped out of my skin when I first saw it, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. But still, despite my excitement for this movie, I was a little bit skeptical. Because sometimes when you take a short film and stretch it to 2 hours, it can lead to the problem of having not enough content to fill the running time. A good example of a movie that suffers from this is the movie 9, which was produced by Tim Burton from, I think, 2009. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot about that movie I liked, but you could definitely tell that it was a short film trying really hard to be a feature-length film. So I was a little worried that this movie might suffer from something like that too, but it turns out that my worries were completely unfounded because this movie is fucking great. It's kind of like a more mainstream version of movies like The Babadook or It Follows, in that it takes the same amount of care that those movies made in crafting the creepy atmosphere and the scares and the monster that it's centered around, but it kind of lacks the beautiful artistic metaphor that those other two movies had. It's kind of like the difference between Halloween and Friday the 13th. They're both very much slasher movies, but one's way more of an artistic achievement while the other is way more popcorn entertainment. But both are good and both are very much worth your time, especially if you're a horror fan, which is basically what I feel about this movie. This movie is very much worth your time. And one thing I really like about the movie is they actually did a really good job of bringing the monster to life in a way that didn't feel like it was digital overload. Like, it kind of felt like they did most of the movie practically, but I don't know for sure. And if they did do a lot of digital effects, it was so well hidden that I had no way of telling, which is basically what you want. Like a good magic trick, you want to trick the audience into believing that it could be real. And this movie does that. The monster, which actually has a name, but I'll get to that when we get to the spoilers, feels like it could actually exist. Even though it is such an absurd concept, something that can only be seen in the dark, it still felt tangible. It felt like she could reach out and claw my face while I was watching the movie. And yeah, this movie does have a lot of jump scares, but they're actually really well-earned jump scares. They are actually set up, they have great tension, and when they hit you in a way that I actually did kind of jump out of my seat. But the thing I liked the most about this movie was actually the characters. Basically, this movie follows this family who's been stalked by this monster for quite some time. Like, you get the indication in the movie that the elder sister experienced the monster when she was a kid, and now her little brother's experiencing it now. So this monster has been around for a while, and it's very obvious that this monster is part of the reason why the elder sister has separated so much from the family. And now she's this, like, rebel metal chick who lives off on her own and has this sexy boyfriend. And seriously, this movie really won me over with the sister because she lives in an apartment that's filled to the brim with Slayer posters, Avenged Sevenfold posters, Ghost posters, and just all around, like, Frank Frazetta art just all along the walls. So this was a girl after my own heart, I must say. But that's neither here nor there. That's just set decoration, quite literally. What's important is that these characters are actually really well written, and every actor involved plays their parts really well. And I really found myself caring about whether or not this family will patch up their differences and defeat the monster that's been haunting them. Anyway, I kind of feel like I'm over-vaguing myself now, so I'm gonna move on to the spoilers so I can get into the nitty-gritty. So, if you want to know my spoiler-free thoughts on the movie, it's really fucking good. I highly recommend it. It'd be really good for a teenage audience especially. Like, if you have a teenage daughter, or if you are a teenage daughter, or if you have a teenage sister, then definitely take them to go see the movie or go see the movie yourself. You're bound to have a good time. And most likely you'll get the shit scared out of you, kinda like I did while watching it. Okay, so basically the main character of this movie is the daughter of the family I mentioned earlier. And it turns out she's been estranged from the family because her mom is fucking batshit crazy. Like, she's obviously suffering from some sort of schizophrenic delusion of some kind, though they don't quite go into what it could be because it turns out there is no scientific diagnosis that she has, because what she has is this monster that's been stalking her named Diana. And what Diana is it turns out she was an old friend of the mother's from when she was a little girl, and she was suffering from severe depression and went to go live in a mental hospital for a couple weeks. Or maybe it was a couple years. I'm not quite sure on the details there. It's been a couple days since I watched the movie. But the point is, when she went to this hospital, she befriended this girl, Diana. And the thing about Diana is she had some sort of skin condition that the doctors couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. But what they did know is that the skin condition would cause her to burn up when she was in sunlight. So basically, she had all the worst parts of vampirism without any of the benefits. And one day the scientists try to do this experimental procedure on her, which causes her to completely disintegrate into ash, and was thought to be dead, but it turns out wasn't quite dead. She lives in some sort of in-between state between living and dead. So essentially, she's an undead zombie ghost, but one that can only be seen in the dark. So you get all these really fucking cool, scary scenes where characters are being stalked by this monster that when they turn on the light, it completely disappears. But when the light fails, or when they turn it off, the monster is there, and the monster is coming at them, and this monster will stop at nothing to fucking tear their fucking face off. And it turns out the reason why this monster wants to do all that is because, essentially, the mother is the only friend she ever had, and so she's essentially killing anyone that might cure her. Because it turns out Diana can only really exist as long as the mother remains crazy. So if she takes pills, seeks therapy, or confronts her inner demons in any way, shape, or form, there's a chance Diana might disappear into non-existence. Which is why at the beginning of the movie, Diana kills the mother's husband. Because it turns out the stepfather is essentially investigating into ways of helping his wife. And Diana can't have that because Diana needs the mother to stay crazy so that she can stay existing. So naturally, when the son comes to the sister and explains to her that Diana has come back and that the mom's going crazy again, and the sister tries to find a way to cure the mom of the Diana problem, of course that means Diana's gotta get rid of the rest of the family. Sure, there's a couple subplots, like the subplot between the sister and her punk rock boyfriend, but that's relatively minor and not as important as everything else going on. Though let me just say, I felt really bad for the boyfriend throughout this whole story because he is trying really fucking hard to gain the sister's affection, but he's having to deal with some crazy ass bullshit on the way, and kudos to him for sticking around throughout the whole thing. So anyway, as you could probably tell from that synopsis, there is a bit of a artistic metaphor here, despite what I said earlier. Like, there's this vague idea of Diana kinda maybe representing, psychological disorders, or maybe Diana represents the things that get in between us and our loved ones, but it's far vaguer than movies like It Follows or The Babadook, so that's why I say it's not as much of a grand artistic statement, because really, all of this is just an excuse for Diana to stalk this family and drive them all fucking crazy. But like I said, it does all the scare parts really fucking well. Though the one complaint I do have about this movie is I feel like it kind of fudges its own internal logic towards the end. Like up until the third act, Diana has very strict, very clearly defined rules. Like when there's darkness, she has free reign, but when the lights are on, she completely disappears into nothingness. She can't touch them, she can't be seen, but it is kind of assumed that she can still move around, just without actually any physical contact. But towards the end of the movie, it feels like the rules change all of a sudden. Because there are moments where she straight up grabs them in the dark and then they turn on the light and she gets burned instead of just disappearing. But that doesn't make sense with what happened earlier in the movie because they would turn on lights all the fucking time and she would just blink out of existence. So why all of a sudden she was getting burned at the end instead of just disappearing is kind of beyond me. It just kind of felt like a lazy conceit to add more tension towards the end, but I honestly don't feel like it needed it. It was already scary as it was. They didn't need to completely break their rules to make it scarier. Plus, at that point in the movie, they had added this really cool dimension where the characters had found themselves a black light. And it turns out, in the black light, you can actually see her without making her disappear. And no, the black light is not the thing that burns her. They're using a normal flashlight on her while she's in the black light, but it still doesn't make sense because she should disappear like she did earlier in the movie. Why doesn't she do it there? It's don't break your own rules, movie. It's a little frustrating. Though to be fair, movies like Nightmare on Elm Street and It Follows have broken their own rules to a certain extent, so I can give this movie a bit of a pass on that. It wasn't enough to completely ruin the movie for me, though it did take me out for a few minutes. But that actually does lead me to another complaint I have with the movie, and that's that when the characters actually do acquire the blacklight and start using it on Diana, we finally get a glimpse of her face for the first time in the movie, and I was a little disappointed because, like I mentioned earlier, I was a really big fan of that original short, and in that original short, when you finally do see the face of the creature, it's this really creepy fucking smiley kid face creature. So when we finally get to the point in the movie where we see the creature, and it turns out it's just kind of a generic looking zombie ghost face thing, I was a little disappointed. Because that face, the face from the original short, that was fucking nightmare inducing. The one from the movie, it's serviceable, but it needs something a little more. Like that fucking creepy smile from the short. Holy shit! Anyway, I hope this vlog has been making sense. I feel like I've kind of just been rambling on and saying random thoughts about the movie with no real coherence. But the ultimate takeaway I want you to have is that Lights Out is a legitimately good, really tight, tense thrill ride of a movie that is 100% worth your time. It most likely won't make my top 10 list at the end of the year, but it's definitely a movie I will look fondly back on when it's all said and done. I'm gonna get out while the getting's good and get back to working on my next Blood Splattered Cinema episode. So, peace out, and, I'll catch y'all later.